Then I can do my.
Yeah.
Thank you. Uh, Welcome to the Thursday, March 19th, 2026, City Council Budget and Finance Committee.
Russian. Yeah.
First up, adoption of the agenda. So, all right, second. I do have a comment. I do want to note that through the director's report and the budget strategies, we're going to be seeing some new stuff today. And so we will be using the more standard protocols. Raise your hand if you want to be recognized by the chair so we can move things smoothly. We don't have a lot of other folks here, but just wanted to make that note. So all those in favor of adoption of the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you. We got public comments. I I do not see anybody in the room.
There's no members of the public.
There are no members of the public in the room, and we are not taking online comments, so I believe we can move beyond public comment period. So I'll close public comment. So first up, director's report. Director Vaughn, would you like to walk us through
Yes.
what we've seen before
Thank
and what
you.
we're going to see next?
Yes, so we're very briefly, you've been provided the January 2026 budget monitoring dashboard and the February one. We're going to just go over the February one because it compounds on itself. In the interest of time, and I'm going to do it very briefly. If you do have any questions outside of this meeting, feel free to follow up with me because I want to reserve more of the time to go over the new reports that we are generating. Not expecting feedback on any of the new reports tonight. I just wanted to put them out there to allow for some feedback to come back, process what's being presented, see if you like it, if you desire a change, and if you would desire a change, that maybe my request is that you email myself and Budget Chair Riddle so that we can improve them as preferred. So thank you for bringing up the February dashboard. This is the report that you're used to seeing on a monthly basis. So if we decide to walk into the new reports, then this will go away. But for now, we're going to kind of keep both hand in hand. So first, just walking down, the Civil Service Commission, just very briefly, is tied directly to police hiring. And as is very public, there has been a lot of more transition, even though it's a small budget within the police department. So that is going over, but it's such a small dollar amount that it isn't really required to amend it at this time. And then walking down to dispatch, that is a quarterly report. So in February, have already paid ahead for the second quarter. So that's why it's at 60%. And then walking down, I'm going to leave the rest of them alone. So if we go down to the non-operating departments, I just want to highlight that we just finished out multiple audits with the auditor. And so that went over a little bit due to the anticipated budget. We are on schedule to be on the auditors on the list next fall. I'm not sure if that's actually going to materialize or not because our previous audit was 2 years. So we are supposed to be on an annual schedule. That being said, that has not been our, so we'll address that if we get into an audit in the fall and with budget going on and whatnot. Walking down to elections, that is at 113%. That is an annual cost. So the city has paid for that dollar amount through this year, and that was directly tied to the November election, and we budgeted that a little bit tighter than we should have. Is there anything else you would like to go over? Would you like to go over the revenue by, I am not going to go over the, just really briefly, I'm not going to go over the capital. We continue to struggle with this report. And so we're just not going to talk about, like, we try to shrink it down and then it just won't bring them all in. We don't know why it's doing that. Don't have an explanation. Multiple people have looked at it. And we're just gonna pass that over to our city administrator and our public works director next month. So you'll have a CIP report on the projects in a very detailed manner next month.
Yeah.
And then, did you want to go over any of the revenue by line items?
I just, if we want to reiterate the differences between the traffic safety fund and the transportation cap, just kind of the ones that are kind of low and how they differ and what they serve.
The traffic safety fund, that is on the first page.
On the first page, yeah.
On the first page, sorry, I misdirected. That was on me.
Sorry.
I misdirected. So on the first page, the traffic safety fund is directly tied to the 002 fund. We refer to that very internally, and that is the school walk zones. And so on the back, those numbers are there to show you the dollar amounts. And the
Those are the 24-hour cameras, school walk zone.
the school, yes,
That are operate. Thank you.
correct.
Help people keep track of the two different types.
Apologies for not extending that. And then the transportation capital, that one is tied specifically very directly to reimbursements. So once we start to receive reimbursements, and more specifically the roundabout project, then you will see that that trend change and increase.
And then on the back.
And then on the back, walking into just really briefly, business tax is coming in at 73%. Construction permits are at 60%. The gas tax, motor vehicle excise tax, is at 55%, which is slightly under target, just to highlight that. And it's something that we've definitely been keeping our eye on. Mechanical and plumbing permits are coming in at 70%. Passport revenue, even with the adjustment, I do want to remind that we did just amend this up within the mid-biennial, and it's still trending at 60%. So good job, municipal services. Just shout out. And so real estate, the excise tax is at 91%. And yeah, clearly our estimation on what home sales and some other sales, it was lower than anticipated. That's really the place you want to be. You don't want to overstate what you think you're going to bring in for the real estate excise tax 1 and 2, which directly fund your capital stuff. The sales and use tax is at 67%. The traffic safety cameras, these are the originals. The originals.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny how that came out. The originals, the school zone cameras and the red light tickets. That is what this 52% is directly tied to. That single line item.
Thank you. Comment from the mayor.
Yes, thank you. I just a quick thought. TBD.
Transportation Benefit District for everybody online.
Thank you. Yeah, we love our acronyms going, but I was thinking that it would be great to know where we're turning from what our base is to what it's supposed to be. I think that the TBD will be a great thing because during COVID, a lot of people couldn't pay their cabs, and so that's money that goes directly into our street overlays, and it's the only tax that goes straight into our coffers, which is a really important one. And so, is that something that would be difficult to do?
And actually, that is a great segue into our new report.
I love it.
If there isn't,
Any other comments?
to keep it moving so that we can have more time for the discussion
What's
portion.
that? I
You
teed it up. I
certainly
just like
thank
threw it up, and
Thank you.
it's like T-ball, right?
Right. So let's go with the fun one. Fund. There's
Make finance.
Take
I was gonna say there's
a
nothing
lot of
fun
times
about
you
finance.
gotta remove the fun from the fun. It's not so fun. So
There was a D on that. Fund level. What about that? Yep. Thank you.
I have to say, I'm never gonna wear this sweater based on the blinding light here from the TV.
You know what they wear in jail, don't you?
Well, no, I was, my joke today at the fall staff meeting was we took a bunch of hats, the happy hats, and knitted them into a sweater, so.
I like
Same
this.
thing, I saw.
All right, let's refocus. Thanks, Matt, for bringing that up. Did you wanna
So I'm gonna
make it bigger and hide us or?
that I think is,
Size downside,
Yeah.
oh,
Oh, yeah, you have to go to the screen for that, sorry. Okay,
so walking through this report, the request was to have at a very high level overview, where are we at for each fund? And so that is not something that is generated and displayed very transparently on our dashboard. But so this is, I just want to make sure that, and I heard at the last meeting that it was desired to see where the original budget stood, the amended budget for both revenues and expenditures. And so this is what I've come up with in order to basically walk through each fund at the fund level for a quick overview. And then I'll just walk right down to the Transportation Benefit District, which is Fund 104, and go straight into where the mayor teed up that conversation. So you can see within the Transportation Benefit District, which is funded by two things. The vehicle tabs are one way that we receive funding, and then the city also councilmanically adopted the
Thank you.
the 1% sales tax, 0.1%. So there's two things that actually fund that. And then that goes into the revenue. And then those dollars are directly how the city funds our road overlay program. So that's where you'll see the expenditures. It's going directly into it's funded out of, the overlays are done through the Transportation Capital Fund. And it's transferred into that to be shown in a capital fund for the actual expenditures. And so that's a great one to just say, you have the original budget, then you've walked into the amended budget, and then the 2025-2026, we're doing both years. So it's what we've brought in so far to date. And this report is through February of 2026. So you can see that we have brought in $914,076, which is 60% of what was budgeted. Which is on target, because target would be 58.3% through February. And then walking over to the expenditure side, again, the same thing, 804,809, and it wasn't amended to increase, and we have sent 400,000, and then the 2,000, almost 3,000 or 2,000 was the cost allocation, the portion of that fund. So it's at 50% of the expenditure. And so that stands through every single fund. I will circle back to the general fund, because that's our fund that the most discussion occurs around. And so again, the 2025, that's the beginning fund balance. Those are actuals. You'll see that as you walk through to the other side of the report, that it's projected, because we haven't completed 2026 yet to date. So, but this is just going to be a monthly, very high level fund level overview, so you can walk through each fund. And that kind of concludes my report, or my overview of this, in order to give you guys, give all council members time to process and provide feedback. And if you would like to see something differently on that.
thank you, Director Baum. I think the one thing I like about this is, if you go back to the big budget, there's all those spreadsheets in there of funds, and this really helps us tie what we saw in the budget and we discussed, and then seeing it progress through the biennium and see where we are in the biennium. So I really appreciate this content. Does my colleague?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, so do you want to walk into so the other piece I did was basically going into the general fund. This is the only one I've really completed. I've started on the other funds, but then I stopped realizing if you wanted revisions, I better hold before and then receive your feedback in order before I completely build it out. So this is the general fund overview. And again, I do want to state that this is provided on the original dashboard. And I don't have pretty graphs yet, but I will work on the pretty graphs after we agree to the numbers or the system and the method. So then walking through this one, again, original budget, amended budget, the year to date 2025, year date to actuals, the 25-26 year to date actuals. So that's the combined for the true biennial number. And then walking to the continuing 2026. And instead of saying like a year to date, we've used the period to date. So I'm just going to stick with that period to date. That's what PTD stands for. Probably should make a note of that. And then the percentage. So also, as you walk down, this is the general fund departments, and you're going to see some gray shading, and I might need to make them colors. I will figure that out. Because visually I see that that's probably not the greatest now. So the executive department, when there's something that's like shaded, it's not within that department, but it's kind of within that department. It's like a sub. I guess finance is a great example. So finance is the state auditors is not technically within our budget, although it's a sub, it's right under our budget for a budget. Executive, it's legal services. For municipal services, it's elections. So those are kind of grouped together. And so I wanted to show that those kind of go together, even though they're separate, but kind of together. And then walking down to the environmental services, again, hearing nonstop feedback about the tree. It is not a fund, tree accounts. I will continue to say that. And so this is the only one that I've broken out separately that is not necessarily highlighted differently on our current dashboard because we get so many questions on that. And so in an effort to increase the transparency, this is what I've come up with. Again, this only shows the expenditure side of it. And so more to come if we want to build that out in a different manner. And then I do want to walk down and say, previously we had a planning department and a building department, and now we have community development. Within our current structure, we have still kept them separately as a planning department to identify those costs and a building department to identify those costs separately in addition. And that has been the desired practice moving forward is to just have those still stay in separate items, even though they're under the community development umbrella. And I think that pretty much concludes my brief overview. And if you guys have feedback, then I welcome it at this time.
And again, thank you for putting in the time and effort to build this. I think the one thing I like about this is when I can go to the expenditures in the budget and there's those, each section has a lovely little spreadsheet. And again, some of them might have two spreadsheets and you've matched that here. So again, there's a nice alignment if we ever want to go back to the budget that we have on hand. So appreciate that. And I think for me, the revelation was that obviously this is not related to the fund. It's all one fund, right? These are the departments within the fund, and those are tracked financially as departments. And generally speaking, we do not want to mess with that. So I appreciate having a lovely conversation to understand the importance of why these are the categories, because it directly relates to how the budget was built and how it's tracked in our financial system. You can track it.
And I will highlight that if there is one line item that goes over within a department, I, as the finance director, care about the bottom line of that department. So if if a department is under on multiple line items, but then over on one, at the end of the day, I don't feel it's a best practice to amend a department's line item if they're going to stay within budget, because I want to make sure that, you know, we don't over amend per se. So that's just my best practice that I have taught everybody, that, you know, as we look at these budgets together, that if you're over on one line item, I care more about the bottom line for your entire department, and to stay within your department's budget. That's the constraint.
Makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. The only thing I might suggest is maybe putting like department numbers on there so we can see how it's different from fund. Just so that there's a clarity there. That might just make it cluttered though.
Do you,
I don't know what
I
you
would,
think.
I would personally like that too.
Okay,
department numbers?
just add the department numbers.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think that this is really getting to where are we on that general fund, really in the micro level, as micro as I think we're ever gonna get on council, like you said.
I think this will help the public too, when they're scrutinizing all of this, they can track it better, and hopefully it'll get less questions.
And I'm working to build out again what you have on this spreadsheet, the street fund, the surface water fund, the sewer fund. But I wanted to make sure that this was what you council desired to see and then I will make sure that you have a more full breakout.
Absolutely. And again, those will be emailed around to council.
They have been.
And they have been, okay.
Mhm.
And then any comments that we have, again, send them to myself and Director Vaughn over the next week and a half. So that there's time for the director to make the adjustments, and we can revisit these in the April Budget and Finance Committee. Do not expect a fast turnaround, as this is sort of a whole new process. We want to give the whole council time to absorb it and comment.
And yeah, and once we decide that we're as a budget and finance committee, that these are the reports, that the intention is to have the dashboard go away. That these become the actual reports, and then we'll make graphs out of it, and we can also do the same. We can show it very visually in addition to the numbers, so we can do both. But I just want to make sure this is what you want to see, and then we'll walk it into a bigger, and then
I think it provides a lot more clarity this way.
Yeah,
thank you.
appreciate that.
Good job.
Okay, well, that is the director's
And
report.
that's, yeah,
Anything else? Or are you happy with what your feedback you've received so far?
I am happy.
Okay,
We can walk into, yeah.
the next step.
Mhm.
So, the next step, we're kind of moving into financial outlook and budget strategies. This is continuation of the work that council did last week. Last week we did have, like I said, it was a very organic conversation. We were really running a lot of ideas out there. Towards the end, I heard some sort of coalescing towards an idea. So today we're going to just be a little bit more, again, methodical as we go through this conversation. We don't really have a lot of folks, but again, Larry, Councilmember Goldman, just let us know if you have a comment that you want to speak up.
Rosedown's on there as well.
Oh, and Councilmember Rosenau, thank you. Just raise your hand if you have a comment you'd like to add, and I will call on you. So what do we want to jump right into our
You want me to throw it there?
spreadsheet? Since people love spreadsheets, or do you have a comment?
Do you want to introduce? Does you want to
Introduce.
before we display it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
anything you
see
want
that,
to add
please.
before,
Sure.
and I can walk through
Yes,
details.
Mhm.
That was function.
because once it's up, everyone's looking at that, not
Yeah,
me.
I won't put it up yet.
That's all.
That was what I was.
That's what you were trying to
That
get
was politely what I was trying to say.
I'm just so excited we have it. I really want to get it up, but
Maybe explain the process.
yes, so as I mentioned last week, that we had a lot of spreadsheets going around last year. They kind of were slightly different, slightly the same. So this year we want to create one functional spreadsheet, and then we're sticking with it. So
Because the goal is.
the goal is to determine the two buckets and the reserve. And then if necessary, to look at what a levy rate may be. So the setup for this is to walk us through what our kind of budgeted environment is and expectations for the 6-year outlook. And then look at the budget stabilization fund as one of our buckets, the strategic opportunity fund as one of our buckets, and then the reserve percentage as one of our other variables. We are not going to be looking at the levy variable yet. We want to establish some rules and guidelines about how we're going to select how much goes into the budget stabilization and the strategic opportunity funds. So if you'd like to put that up now.
Or what the budget reserve should be.
Yes, and the reserve. So we kind of want to focus on that before we do levy. So here's the blue. That's all budget related numbers. Again, the revenue and the expenditures in the very top two lines. That's coming out of 25-26 budget, 27-28, biennial or 6-year outlook.
So the revenue and expenditure numbers in here are based off of the 6-year financial forecast that's provided at the council retreat.
And I have a question. I'm gonna, just because I was looking at this and does this show what I think it's important to show, and I don't know if this does or not, because I don't see labels the way that I would understand them. But does this show the 16% budget reserve amount the way it is right now? So right now we're 60% of revenue.
Down through these.
I'll
Yeah.
walk through each of these
Yeah.
areas.
Yeah.
So.
So
All right,
I was going to go through the colors and then you can take over. Is that okay?
that's fine.
Okay. So obviously gray, levy, it's sort of gray right now. We're not going to be focusing on that. The orange peach, that is the two buckets that we have.
Oh, is anybody colorblind and this
Yeah,
is,
they could be, but
I
We need to, we need to do a colorblind test on it. And get
Is-
better colors.
Anyway, lines 9 through 11.
Yes.
There we go.
Off on the left, the
Thank you.
fund allocation, sideways text. That's the budget stabilization and the strategic opportunity variables. And then we have another balance that gets calculated after that is addressed. And then in the purple that says reserve check on the left, that is where we do our reserve check. So that's where we make sure whether we're have an adequate reserve or not as we move through from biennium to biennium to biennium. And then at the bottom, we just have some sort of the aggregate numbers that we are referring to, like the 26 total assessed value for the whole city, things like that. And then what the levy rate actually will be when we get to that point. Question from Mayor, comment?
Yeah, well, it's just more of a comment. I want to, first of all, thank you, Chair Riddle, for putting all this together, a lot of this together, working with staff on this. It's great. It's fantastic.
Team
It's
effort.
really, it's a huge lift. I know that. I mean, my gosh. The other thing I would just say is we were looking at zero numbers in there in the orange, thinking about what you allocate as policymakers to these different buckets.
Mhm.
One, absolutely, 15 years into this, adventure, which has been wonderful. Trying to make sure that we are staying fiscally forward thinking. And there's a lot of other terms I could use there, probably be, anyway. And then the other thing is, when you think about strategic opportunity, we're looking at right now as a community, challenges related to capacity of City Hall. We're looking at challenges related to other things. We have interest from other communities to partner with us for various resources, sports, potentially police, other things. What does that look like to you guys? What is that? What is, so this discussion, I know you'll look, think about this and inform the public as to what your, what the values are there, because I think it also, it's intertwined with conversation that we had earlier today amongst a couple of leadership team members, that economic development is somewhat dependent upon the solvency of us being able to um, find economies of scale for our courts, for our police, some other things. And I think those things are things that we can be a model for the other cities and the region. So thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair.
All very astute observations, so thank you very much for bringing those to the floor. Councilmember,
So I can
Good.
answer your question if I can walk everybody through this.
I got
We'll get to your point. Okay, so as you see in the top, lines 3 through 6, just gonna upper point. So obviously, revenues, expenditures, it shows you the delta, running a deficit, so that's that number.
and that's our structural deficit that we refer to for those who are listening to it later.
And
That gets me.
I'm sorry, I'm not gonna just completely interrupt you, however I am.
Yes.
That is also what I refer to as the operating. So when we have an operating issue, your revenues are not meeting you're not covering your expenditures. Apologies.
Defining terms is very important.
Well, and I think too, if I may, this is a conversation that goes back 18 years, honestly. Structural deficit falls flat for most people.
Yep.
When it comes to expenditures versus revenues, we're talking about a broken business model. And
Yes.
that is really the fundamental thing. That resonates more with people. It's a broken business model. It's not one that we created. It's one that we're influenced by the state and other influences.
Yes, and for very simplified terms that you can take from your home operating financial, that means that the amount of money that you're bringing in on a monthly basis, that you're expending more and therefore pulling out of your savings on a regular basis. And that is what the mayor's referring to as a broken business model. So I'm going to simplify it just one step further from that.
Yeah. I mean, the structural deficit seems
It's hard to get, it's when you,
Yeah.
when costs of food keep going up, but you never get a pay raise.
Yeah.
It's there, at some point, that's going to be so far out of balance, you can't sustain it anymore. And that's what we've been facing.
So what would you call it? I mean, right now you're calling it a structural deficit. So what should you call it, or what might be?
I want to make sure that we're talking about the same, that the terms are interchangeable.
Well,
That's what I think that we want to
We're
highlight.
operating at a deficit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
pure and simple.
Yeah.
We have less cash coming in than we have going out. And
Yep.
spending our savings.
What I'm suggesting is whatever these terminologies that we go over, it is not a bad idea to put a key somewhere on something like this to describe it. So then when people are looking at, because what I'm trying to come with is whatever the numbers are going to end up being, they should be explained in a way that the public can understand. So then in order for the finance director not to get bombarded with a bunch of questions, when maybe a description could help.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's what I'm just trying to, so we might need to do some of that work on this so that the terms are familiar to people that aren't in the middle of this all the time.
So
Perfect.
back to your 16%. But you'll see down here, line 50, 16% is plugged in. What that does is that calculates 16% in each of these bienniums. So remember, the way we calculate our 16% reserves is on an annual basis.
Yes.
So it takes, in 25-26, it took 16% of this 25, almost 26 million. 16% divided by 2, that is the 2,075,000.
And so that is based on revenue, which is,
revenues.
and so that is what our law says right now.
That's our biennium.
That's
Yes.
our current policy.
That's
And
current policy.
Yeah,
That's
and if you wanted to change it to expenditures, and Councilmember Goldman sent an email about this earlier, yes, you would just change the formulas in here and calculate it off expenditures.
right.
It will be higher. You
But-
will see that it grows as you go across the spreadsheet because it is tied to our projected revenues, and so you are needing to hold more and more
So to my point, the reserve check, where I understand why you're using that language, but maybe you would put, if that is the budget, if that's the minimum at 16%.
Minimum
This-
reserves.
Change that
Label.
label,
Yeah.
please.
So. Let's see, back to this, so if we get between, so we won't worry about the gray and the peach, so lines 7 through 11 for right now. Lines 12 through 15, what you're seeing is beginning fund balance. Of just under 8.6 million. Your unallocated fund balance in this is subtracting out your general fund deficit. That leaves you in, let's see. So that's unallocated fund balance, then that subtracts out your reserve and leaves you with an ending fund balance at that year of $4 million. When you project into the next biennium, you add that back in, that 2,217,000. And then it starts subtracting out again. What this really shows, so if you look on line 14, your ending fund line, sorry, G14, I've got it highlighted, first there. Your ending fund balance is 1.5 million. And your reserves are at 2.3 million. You're getting upside down.
Mhm.
You don't have enough ending fund balance. Technically match your reserves, but they get added back in. But then when you see the real deficit is when we get into the next biennium where you have a negative number in there.
And to reiterate, this is all per current policies.
Yes.
We've made no adjustments.
And based on the 6-year forecast that we just presented, that I as the finance director just presented at the budget retreat. So it's based off of very current numbers, including the mid-biennial budget adjustment, and then also being mindful of removing what we define as one-time expenses or things that we don't think are going to be ongoing to be accurate.
I have another question.
Yes.
Is it appropriate to possibly have a separate line item for the budget reserve amount? So that, you don't, people aren't having to do math in their head about what it is, not unless that's gonna be in, well, I'm just thinking that,
So line item 15 is the actual reserve number, dollar amount.
Yes, but but is it that way in the budget? Is there a line item, is there a specific
No.
line item?
I
for a
see what
fund?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what you.
You're, yeah, no, you're,
Yeah.
words are hard.
Especially with no dinner, right?
Ow, I should just stop. But you bring up a great point in the sense of when, even going back to my fund, it is not going to state that the dollar amount that is defined as the reserve. Is that the question? Of the 8.5, that 2.217 is defined as the reserve.
Like, I am looking ahead to questions that you might get. And I'm just saying that if there was a separate line item, however you do it, because I'm not that person. But because people they've heard a lot about what these numbers are or what they should be. So if you had it specifically where they could see it, then it's just another less question that would be possibly asked of you later.
Are you saying in the budget
Yes.
portion of it?
In the budget portion, it's showing here that this is our kind of a worksheet, but when it comes to the budget, because there's some.
Well, I wonder if
But we've
financial report, like to,
No, I think it's the start of the budget.
Where
The fund balances, it says, are you meeting or exceeding?
and we have yes or no.
Oh, yeah.
It's not.
The actual dollar
amount.
Yeah.
That would be the best place, I think, for that info.
Well,
And-
Schedule a fund balance.
if I may, I think what you're saying, Paula, is really apropos of what we need to do to communicate.
Yeah.
Really, it's important.
Yes.
In any way we can find an opportunity to disseminate the information in different
Consistently.
ways, not just one, because we've got it in a bunch of different ways here. And I think that from our standpoint, we do get into sort of place of when it's financial, we're doing this, but some people don't understand the spreadsheet, right? So I think there are opportunities here, and I think that's great. And the other thing I just want to say really quickly is I do really appreciate the camaraderie and the tone that you all have set here. It's great because this is the kind of thing that we got to do. We got to dig in and get it done. Because
Well, the number, I mean, just real quick before, the numbers are the numbers. I mean, the money is the money. And,
Darn straight.
and but it's the explanation and the process of how we come to this.
Yep.
So I'll shut up.
Councilmember Goldman, you have your hand up. Thank you for your patience.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm going to echo Councilmember Good. As much as I can work my way around the spreadsheet, I find the purple section to be unintuitive because what we're kind of saying, okay, we have $8 million in the general fund, but two of those million are untouchable because they're reserves. And that's a nuance that I don't think gets to the public. And I wonder, could we, we have a budget stabilization fund, could we create a reserve fund? And that reserve fund would have 16% and it would be effectively untouchable. But that way, whatever remains in the general fund itself, those are everything in the general fund that remains would be properly unallocated.
Mm, mm.
I think there's
I
some
agree with
implications
that.
on the financial side that our financial director would like to
I
address.
wasn't gonna quite get into this because once we started this conversation, I realized there is a portion of your fund balance that I'm gonna just blatantly say becomes is outside of the city's control. And I'm gonna use the opioid dollars as an example very transparently. So we signed in, we received those opioid dollars. They are restricted by outside of our agency, and we can only spend those dollars on specific line items. And I think that is a detail that I just noted as we were walking through this, that we are going to have to break out and very transparently show. And that is something that we do on an annual basis internally within finance, and we display that on our annual financial report. And so we just need to somehow bring that into. Not trying to make this conversation more complex, but I did, as we were walking through, make a note to myself saying there's a portion of this conversation that we might need to say this is a restricted balance.
Sure.
It's not
It's
allowed
there,
to
but
be
yeah.
allocated.
But I think what Councilmember Goldman was suggesting is there a reserve fund?
So,
Which I think there's challenges with that.
so I think if you look at the spreadsheet, maybe it's just nomenclature that we need
Yeah.
to change. Unallocated fund balance does reflect that number. That is the beginning fund balance minus the reserve check.
So
And
maybe
it's a
we call
matter
it that.
of how you
Label.
message to the public.
Yep.
This is what we have to spend. And then the ending fund balance is that minus this deficit from above. Problem with the spreadsheet, it doesn't tell a story, so I think you need
Yes.
a cover sheet or something that explains this, but I think the nomenclature
Yeah.
in column B could be changed, because that's exactly what Councilman Goldman is asking for is
Yes.
what are the dollars that we have to spend that aren't restricted because of our reserve, and that is the unallocated fund balance. That means something to us, but it doesn't mean something
Yeah.
to the general public.
And so I think in the purple, I'll get you a minute, Councilmember Rosenau. Changing those nomenclature, I think will be a big part of that, so we should discuss what that looks like. Can I get to my council member?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilmember Rosenau. What's your comment?
Yeah,
Question?
this is a slightly different. It's just a question to clarify for a couple small little things. Hopefully, one is for a variable. Do we also want to include something? Do we want to do anything with the council contingency fund? And do we want to represent that here for any of these purposes? And two is as I'm playing around with it, when I change in the variables section, if I put something into the budget stabilization fund area, it divides it up it generates it as revenue then.
Correct,
And-
so, oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
just wanted to make sure, like, is that something that in the way that it's statutorily defined, that's just how it's going to work, or
No.
yeah.
Sorry. That came from my recommendation, what we did with Racer, and so. If you take $1 million and throw it to the budget stabilization fund. Part of the idea behind that is potentially if you ran a levy, you could buy down the rate that you would charge, because. It shows you put in this stabilization fund, you're gonna buy down the rate over the 6 years, the 3 biennia. And so that plugs it in at 333, 333, lots of threes across the biennia, become part of the rev.
No, I'm practicing my trombone here in the background.
Yeah, sorry about that. I got a
Yeah.
trumpet player in the background.
And so that is not statutorily required, it's just how the spreadsheet was built, so that when we get to that time to discuss. Do we want to put something in the budget stabilization? Are we gonna run a levy? If
Yeah.
we're gonna run a levy. Do we want to put money aside and buy down the rate instead of it being 24 cents, maybe it's, the lesser number. And be able to tell that story, so that's all that's doing.
Yeah, because I think right now that there's sort of a policy and municipal code direction for that budget. Which we want to address. If we want to change its function a little, we'd have to address that. But I think that it seems like that is being looked at for, again, those two different functions. One is buying down the levy by providing some dedicated funds to offset the cost of the total cost that we would be asking our community for. So that would bring that down each biennium. And the other is as its sort of original purpose as a stabilization fund. And then just to the question about the council contingency fund, it is a little different. It is whack, or what's a
RCW.
RCW type thing, so we're not gonna get into that during this discussion. Its function and what controls it is just too different for us to put into this mess. Is that?
So
Okay.
that's my question for you is because the last discussion we were talking about budget stabilization and the council contingency fund. And then the subject was brought up that there is restrictions around those. So now what you're saying is that since the council contingency has the RCWs that govern that we are not going to be using that for this purpose.
Yes,
So
because
we are only-
we don't get to determine how it's being used.
So then we're only considering
Sorry.
the budget stabilization and the strategic opportunity. Those are the only two we're thinking about.
Yes,
here.
yeah,
The reserves too, that was my
And the reserve.
point with Bill, RCWs. There are very specific restrictions on allocations of reserves and some other things here too. So you've got to be, if we have, and if we
I meant
briefly
for
touched.
fun. I'm sorry. I meant to
Yeah.
say, I know that, yes, but I'm just talking about the conversation before was council contingency fund and using that as a way to. But we're not gonna be doing that, so.
yeah, I think it's not part of this equation at this.
Yeah, it's
It,
not
it
part of
doesn't
this.
quite match what we're going for here with
Right.
projecting
Oh,
need.
That's all I'm trying to clarify.
Oh, no, yeah, I was just talking about the reserve
Well,
fund.
yes.
That's the other ones are you guys.
Yeah, well, the 16%, yes, if we change that, we would have to make a motion, right? And we would change it if we were doing that in any other manner.
And for right now, we're kind of just holding off how we would change the policy so that it matches whatever our desire is. Yeah, so I think what else we're looking at here, if you'd like to plug in now something for the strategic opportunity or the let's do budget stabilization fund first.
And actually, there was one other thing I wanted to ask about with the reserve
Yes,
number, because we did in the last council meeting talk about the option also not to change our statutory reserve limit, but to set a higher target of reserves. And in playing around with this, one could put in 24%, say, and that does not. There's nothing to this spreadsheet if you set a higher number there, that doesn't require us then. There's nothing about the number that is set as a reserve here that has to refer to the statutory limit. It just can't go below whatever the state law says. But
I mean, we can look at it a couple of different ways, but if we sort of ignore the policy side, and I hate to do that, but we can work the policy side, whichever way we want to do it, but,
I think it would be disingenuous to put in a reserve percentage that is more than what our policy states. So
Yeah.
if you're gonna have a policy, if you're gonna have a different number than what policy is, I do believe it should be policy.
yes, and that will be wrapping up once we figure out our numbers.
If, just bring it down to the
Yes.
simplest terms, if no levy was run, saying, putting 24% in your reserves, you're still gonna, 16 is your minimum. Even if you wanted to add another $1 million, you're gonna be drawing from those, they're gonna roll at the end of the year. I think you wanna stick with your policy, 16%. It's artificially inflating it to then spend it in the future year. And as you play with this, if you change that 24, you kind of see where ending fund balances end up and how quickly it kind of needs to come back in.
Yeah.
So that was my caution at the council meeting, was be really, this is going to unintentionally tie your hands in when it comes to.
And can we just see that, because I just did it online to 24, and you'll see that this following biennium,
Yeah.
we are almost,
You're
we're already into the reserve.
Yeah, so now you're pulling that million back
So
out.
we're gonna be using it anyways at the end of this biennium, because we're already targeting needing to dip into it in order to maintain. And that is without pulling any money and setting it aside into the stabilization fund or the opportunity fund. So I think that's what this tool is showing us, is the what ifs, and we can really see quickly the implications.
Yeah,
Mayor.
very quickly, I mean, I very much appreciate what Councilmember Good said a minute ago about reserves and levels. I think that historically, we think about where we started, and I've heard me talk about this ad nauseum. We're, 15 years into my experiment with this community and this government, that it is, we clawed our way back from really, really challenging reserves. And so setting that level to a place where you feel comfortable that you're getting past election cycles, you're getting past some other things, is I can't tell you how much I stress that. It's so important, because there were a lot of people before me and with me who push in that direction to make sure that that stability is there. And we're now at that place where we have honestly, an enviable position amongst other cities, because we've been really responsible. And you go very far past this budget cycle, this next biennium, and we're going to start getting into a real tipping point. It's much harder to bring those reserves back up. It's much harder because they're one-time revenues, right? I mean,
So there's a good portion of it that's one-time revenues, but it's also a reflection of how tight your departments run. And because you have, this term drives me bonkers. We had salary savings. You didn't, I mean, yes, you may have saved it in the dollars, but you wore out your staff that were here because the work didn't go away. And so there is a hybrid of reasons, not spending on getting innovative, finding a new software instead of using something that had always been done in the past. There is a hybrid of reasons on how this city has built that balance. And that is honestly a shout out to all of your department heads, because everybody has operated so fiscally responsibly, which has then grown that balance. Some of it has been one time, but most of it has been, that it's both. It's all of the above, not having positions that we can fill, but they're budgeted, and things like that. And that's just slowly over time has added and increased that balance with having great reserves and so that's part of it too. It isn't just the one times, it's that I have, and the team, I can say as much as I want until I'm blue in the face as the finance director, but I need the team to buy in and know that you know, if you ask for a budget, if you don't spend those dollars, I'm not going to take them away. We're as a team going to say that we came in under budget and celebrate that, but not, you know, punish you for it. And then now your budget's tighter. And so but because of that, we have created this transparency and built this trust that has then built this balance for quite a few reasons. So I just want to, it is one time for a part of it, but another piece of it is not one time. It's how fiscally responsible your team has handled your dollars.
And they have been. As far as, I mean, it's been amazing what we've been able to work with, but it has landed on the backs of staff in ways that overwork them. And we on council have mentioned this before. We recognize that is a challenge, and it's not a position we're wanting to intentionally lead anyone into. Unintended consequences. So, and again, looking at if we were to increase the reserves, we're immediately going to be only be able to balance our budget by using reserves, and that's going to drain us out in a biennium.
A
Oh,
really good
fast.
example is
Really
budget
fast.
stabilization. So if I put $1 million,
Put 1.2, so we have a nice
no,
round.
I want $1 million.
Oh, fine. I just hate the threes.
If you watch these numbers through lines 12 through 15, nothing changes because the way this works is it's plugging, as Councilmember pointed out, it's plugging back in as revenue. And that is because, so if you put an extra $1 million into reserves, this is really what you would need to be doing with those reserves. Instead of putting it in budget stabilization, you're kind of tucking it away in the reserves and people aren't seeing how it's being spent. So budget stabilization, if you were to use it this manner, shows how it's being spent. And then if council determined that you wanted to go out for a levy, this then, when you start running those numbers, shows you that by doing that, you can lower your levy rate during this, during a first 6-year levy. That leaves you an issue. Well, it's 6 of one, half dozen of another. I mean, it's the same at the end of the day. But at least you show the public how you're spending those extra reserves, not reserves, at an unallocated fund balance. It's through your savings, bank, your prison bank, how you're spending that to buy down their rate. But what it means at the end of the biennium, it's probably a larger, not biennium, the end of the first levy, you probably need a larger rate going forward. Yeah. So that just shows you how. So that budget stabilization, no matter what number you plug in there, it doesn't affect the bottom lines. When you get into the strategic opportunity fund, you're setting those dollars aside. They are no longer part of your general fund discussion. They're no longer part of your balance. And that comes out of the bottom line. And then you'll see the numbers in the outer years. You drop off the cliff faster.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're saying, we can either spend it out of unallocated funds or the budget stabilization fund, but one way or another, we're going to have to spend some money to balance these budgets. But for transparency for the community, that's why we're talking about using the budget stabilization fund. So it's very clear that we've sort of earmarked these funds to support us as we're looking at, you know, a potential levy.
Yeah, I mean, you can really tell the story quickly if you highlight these three, E, F, G, H, I, J, and you look at that, that's $6.2 million that you're plugging in over the next 3 biennia. Yeah.
Yeah,
To
that we need to cover.
To cover.
Yeah.
And
You're
if you
pulling
look,
from your savings.
so you have
You're pulling, does that make sense?
Yeah, oh,
It's
yeah.
But I want to come back to this point. If that totals 6.2 million, look at this where my cursor is right here. Your unallocated fund balance in the next biennium is 6.3 million. So if that's what it takes to balance your budget for the next 3 biennium, you have $1 left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that second line is the balance less the reserve. So as soon as we hit the end of the biennium with no adjustments to revenue or expenditures, we have We're in our reserves solidly by the end of 32. Oh, yeah, thank you. Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, so my question, the sense I got from the council last week is that we wanted sort of 2 months expenses locked as the reserve level, and then 1 month in the stabilization fund. So essentially 16% reserves, 8% budget stabilization. My question, what is the practical difference between doing that versus as a policy matter, just changing our reserve level to 24%? Because to me, it does feel like one of those six of one, half a dozen of the others. And just raising our reserve level feels us like a simpler solution.
And I think it's just because it's just daylighting that we're specifically earmarking funds for a specific use rather than relying us to go into a reserve when we run out. That's kind of the way I'm thinking about it.
So
Historical context to budget stabilization. I mean, that was created in 2013, I believe. The part of that was a more difficult situation amongst the executive and the council. And so I think that that was part of it. It was sort of, there was like, we're not going to allow some of these things need to be put aside for, and we came out of a difficult time very clearly. I mean, there have been 2 times in my professional career that I have been concerned about whether organization I was involved with was going to make payroll. One was just before I came on city council here. Second time was 2015 was when startup I was with, we had to do a capital call because there was some challenges. And that is something you never want to get to. You never want to get to the place where you have to say, what are we going to do to make payroll? I mean, that is the situation that's in, I don't want to cast aspersions of neighboring cities. There are some situations right now where they are absolutely there.
Struggling.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so just to reiterate for Councilmember Goldman, if we were to move that money and call it reserves, we're still going to be eating into that money at the end of the bienniums one way or another.
Oh, I agree completely.
I
I'm
think.
thinking about how we communicate this to the public.
Sure.
To say that if we're going to move money to the stabilization fund and then immediately start using it to pay back the general fund, it just feels like to me, it kind of feels like we're moving shells. Whereas if we just say this is in practical terms what we need to lock up, let's just make that one number.
So the only reason that I recommended it is so that if you went out for a levy, you could show we have allocated $1 million or $1.5 million out of our unallocated fund balance, and we're helping to buy down the rate. Once you start playing with the rate on this, you'll notice that in the outer year, you've got more money than you need because you haven't yet spent this unallocated fund balance. It's basically one time and going to go away. So just a way to show the public how you're investing the dollars. I think what we heard through the last levy is, well, why is it all sitting in an allocated fund balance? Why don't you put it somewhere and show us how you're going to spend it? And so this is in response to that. You could think of any number of ways to do it. It's just when I think about reserves, that's when COVID hits or the next pandemic or 9.0 earthquake. That's when you dive into those. And to say that's now going to be 24% by policy, and then immediately need to start spending against that, it's like to me, it's a false narrative. You said 24%, but you need it today. And so just, I think for messaging, you need to find a way that you can show that we're setting this aside to pay for these bills. And if we're going to ask you for a levy, we're going to dedicate this much out of there so that instead of 24 cents, you pay 21 cents per thousand. Just it's purely just to try and be more transparent of how the dollars are being spent. Now, you could honestly just, my train of thought going. Don't know.
You can lump it all together But to your point, Phil, you could lump it all together. And I think this is really astute. If you lump it all together, then it's sort of like, well, it's a big bucket of money and it looks, the reality is we as a city are saying we're setting this aside in case of an emergency. This is a dire emergency. It sort of levels, sort of a tiered approach to this. And I think that's a very great message to send.
Oh,
So there's-
great feedback.
No, I know where I was.
Okay.
You could also take 5.3 million of your unallocated fund balance at 27, 28 and put it into your budget stabilization and say, if you look at our deltas for the next 3 biennia, this is what we need just to balance the budget. So we pull it out of unallocated. We have to leave some in there because like Lindsay has said, some of it is very restricted funds, opioid funds, things like that make up that number. So you could pick that whole number and say, because you've got between 27, 28, 29, 30, you got $5 million that you're short. And so you move $5 million, say, hey, we'll get through 27, 28. How do we get beyond
But
that?
there's nothing beyond that.
And
Yeah, I mean,
that's
this,
the true story. That's
Yeah.
really where we are.
and I mean, and to just to highlight kind of how dire this operating deficit is, if we were to put the 5 million dedicated to being rolled out in all 3 bienniums, we're still running that same operating deficit, even when we already earmarked that as revenue that we're counting on, that we cannot spend in any other, it's just going into helping the budget, paying for actual stuff. But yeah, we're still just shy of 1 million in the later bienniums. So it's not solving all our problems by just using the unallocated fund, however you want to call it. Did you have a comment, Director Bond?
Yes, I would like to circle back on something Councilmember Goldman said. And I can totally understand from council's perspective how if our intention is to save this larger amount of money, that we need to just state that we're saving this larger amount of money. It is very different in the auditor's eyes. If we do not meet that balance, we are no longer in compliance with our own policies, and it is handled very differently because we are not in compliance with for our own.
Yeah.
And so even though our intention is to hold a 24%, that's where my advice to bring in a target. And I understand that language becomes vague. I wholeheartedly, from a council member's perspective, can understand that doesn't feel like you're being very transparent, but it does become, as we go out into the 6-year forecast, that 16%, when we hold that as our minimum, it does become a very different story than if we adopted 24%. Instead of just saying our target is to meet, even if it's 20%, our policy states we will go no less than 16. Right. And if you run into that delta, it sincerely is the difference of meeting your policy versus not meeting your policy per se in the auditor's eyes. So I completely understand the intention from council's perspective to be very transparent with the public on what our intentions are to do. I just want to be very cautious with the outcome. And this is also what City Administrator Hill was saying, is in the future years, I mean, we're pulling off of that money every single biennium. And so when we get to 31, 32, that becomes a very different story, actually not even there, 29, 30. So
Not a question. I thought when there was talk about modifying the reserve percentage amount, I think that the 16% was established in an earlier time. I would have personally, I'm not a fan of a 24%. It might need to be upgraded a little bit, but I would never go that high because of what you were explaining, because it does filter out in an audit later. So it doesn't possibly need to be changed to be more in time with today, possibly. But I don't think that, I 18%, maybe 20%. I don't think I would do anything more than that because you just create a problem for yourself as in an audit.
It does tend to show up down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you bet.
that's. I think that's why your input on that is very important, Director.
Yes, and I think, and then just not to take us too far off, but just to understand then that strategic opportunity fund is just a one-time removal of one-time funds into that strategic opportunity fund, and it's
Yeah.
restricted by how we can spend it. That's doesn't roll into any other biennium. It's just locking away some of our unallocated funds in a restricted manner and how we can use it.
Yeah, investment in the community.
And that's the investment in the community fund. So the stabilization fund, I like the idea of funding it rather than doing something with the reserves. And I think if it's like 1.1 million, that's about half of the reserves. So that kind of gets us to that 90-day. It's just that we already know we're going to be spending it this next biennium, the following one, and the following one. With the goal that we don't ever have to get into the regular reserves, because again, that's the real critical situation when we have to get there. We are required to balance our budget. We cannot end a biennium with a negative and having no money to cover it. That's not allowed.
I'd cry.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. That was-
we see, we see, some of these negatives show up and yeah, and we have to cover it somehow. That is our job at the city, is to have a balanced budget. Councilmember Rosenau.
Yeah, this is maybe a technical question about the spreadsheet, but it gets to this discussion. As I'm playing with the budget stabilization fund, and one idea that I've been kicking around in my own head is to the point that Councilmember Goldman made before, of visualizing for the public what that structural deficit, or whatever we want to call it, is. Basically putting that, using this budget stabilization fund maybe for that, and saying over the next X years, this is the amount of money that we will be spending down to plug that hole that is left by causes outside our control, unless we can find some healthier way to fill that. And so picking some number that in that case would be relatively large. It would be, for one biennium, it would be 2.25 million. For 4 years, it could be 5 million ish. And then as Administrator Hill was saying, sort of spreading that out over 3 biennia makes sense. When I plug that in, the ending fund balance for the first year drops very low. And my understanding was that because the budget stabilization fund is technically a fund of the general fund, it doesn't actually reduce our reserves.
That is
Correct.
correct.
And so if I'm looking for the reserve check to make sure that we're not falling below the reserve check, I've been just looking at those last 2 lines in the purple area, and that's not the way to do it then?
So from the calculations, when I look at the second line in the purple, the reserve check, that's taking our beginning fund balance, which is the same as the last biennium's ending fund balance, transfers that over, and it takes out the reserve, that first line. Just, when I look at the math there, Phil,
So
it's taking, and then the next line underneath it, which is the 743 on yours, is taking the reserve minus the adjusted balance just above there, so that would be the minus 5.69 dot dot in what's being shown on the screen, which is how much our budget is over, right? So basically that 4.077 million reserve check line is basically saying this is what happens after we cover our expenses with unallocated funds and cover it with some of our unallocated funds specifically targeted to provide us relief.
Like,
And that's,
Have another-
yep. And all that does is it just lets us have that conversation with the community more than anything, because we could always just say we're just going to take that much more out of unallocated funds, as the council members have said. But I feel like the transparency of, and sort of giving it a name and saying where it's from and where it's going, to me, I think that's really important for the community to see. Yes. Councilmember Good.
Yes, we're talking about 16% reserve minimum, and that's based on revenue.
correct.
What is the thought about expenditures or whatever is greater? Would that do anything to hurt auditing or budgeting in the future? Or is that something not to consider? Because there are cities that do, it's either revenue or expenditures, whatever is greater. So that's written in their policy so that there's a little bit more flexibility that way. I
Yeah,
think.
And I would say,
Today, I don't think it matters. I mean, for the future, I think it definitely matters. What we're looking at today, it just means you would have to, if it was based off of expenditures, you would need to hold more in reserves. Gives you less buying time if, say, a levy didn't pass. So,
I'm just trying to see what would be the best way to move forward. I don't know what the answer is. That's would be
so I
input on you guys.
played with the numbers based off of what Councilmember Rosenau was asking. So I plugged in $5 million for the budget stabilization fund. If this is how you want to talk to the public about it. If we don't pass a levy and you put 5 million there, now it puts in the roughly $2.5 million in each of the next biennium. So that you balance out and you see that it becomes less less balanced. And so you can play with it that way just by changing that formula in line 5. Councilmember Rosenau, to your point on the reserve check, line 15, you do compare line 15 and line 14. You see that your ending fund balance in 27-28, the way I've tinkered with this, is less than your reserves. Your reserves and your ending fund balance get added together, it becomes your beginning fund balance and the next. And then you have the same issue. You're adding those two together. Where you get into trouble is in the third biennium where you have a negative 1.18 and a 2.46 in reserves. When you add those together, now what you have moving forward is less than your targeted reserves of 16%. So it does require to do a little math, and we could add another line here just to show you that balance. But this is the year where you really get in trouble is 31, where when you take this negative and you add what you have in reserves and you push it forward to 33, 34, you're no longer meeting your target. You fell behind in that biennium.
Yeah, that may be. I mean, it looks like line 13 is really for the public, maybe the bottom line in all of this. Is that fair?
I mean, that's your savings account. That's roughly.
That's like when that goes to zero, then that's where everything is busted.
Wheels come off.
Yeah, I think, if I may,
Yes, please.
Madam Chair, I think part of this is, it's hard to understand, I mean, where we are right now, the threshold and the horizon, if you will, of where we are in terms of the cliff is out a bit, you know. Variously, you can say it's 3.5 years. I'm more concerned that it's more more or less like more, well, and then even I would disagree with my comrade here, more like 2.5, that because of accelerating the costs. So it's like, is that the second number you're gonna throw out? Okay. But it actually starts getting into a place where when you put it in a spreadsheet, it's actually differential calculus, the curve. It's starting to fall off very, very quickly. And as we go forward, with this discussion, if you will, with the community, the further it goes out, the literally, we're talking about this fall, the options go down astronomically about what you can do to recover. And I don't want to put a finer point on this other than say that existentially for this community, we have to do something. We don't have the opportunity to cut. We really don't. And this is, I mean, I would challenge anybody who's watching this. I'll go toe to toe with you on the numbers. It is not hard to walk through these to say it is not going to work here in a year or two. You're going to barely get to 3.
Yeah.
So the real challenge is how much is this community willing to say we've got to invest in what services that we believe in, and at the same time, from the policymaker side, saying we can move money around, whatever else. I'm going to call it out to our friends out there. It was a feint. They called it out. They said, "Oh, you have unreserved fund balances, whatever else." You start looking at the numbers where you can put the buckets into places. It doesn't matter. It's still going to be a cliff at some point. The question is, do you want to invest in the community, or do you want to just burn everything we have down to the ground and then say, "Oh, we got to fix it now"? That is where I think this community needs to take a very hard look at what is necessary. And I think you guys have a great conversation going. Semantics when it comes to buckets. But I would say one bucket is really important right now, and that is the Strategic Opportunity Fund, because that is something that allows growth for this community and investing in potentially economic development and things like that. So I'll leave it there. But I don't want to. I don't want to let smoke and mirrors from outside people in this community, get in the way of real concrete discussions, because the people who said they have a better way of doing it and said they have numbers and they can do it never materialize. And if they want to come have a conversation with me, they can bring their A game, because it's not there. So.
And to continue your point, Mr. Mayor, everything that we're doing here with the buckets and the 16% and the stabilization, no matter what, we get to the same ending point. Unless you increase revenue,
Yeah,
or decrease expenditures, nothing is really changing in this. It's sort of just semantics of what we call the money. But it's also important for us to know how we call the money is important for our conversation with the community, for the council in the next, as the council evolves over the next few biennium, that we are all in agreement how this money would be spent. But we don't change the bottom line of us being at, an ending fund deficit of 1.4 million at the end of 32. And we do still have a little
that's
bit.
after burning through everything.
That's after going through everything
Yeah.
and having, and that, what I don't see here, Phil, is us covering that's us using the reserve 2 biennium in a row, basically, right? Because in 29-30, we're at 910 unallocated funds, and then we still have to meet our reserve somehow, or it's just everything is not going to change. Nothing is going to change unless you impact revenue or expenditures. But I think this exercise is really good for us to understand the implications policy-wise, the implications with how we communicate with our community, and how we plan on spending what money we do have today.
I think this spreadsheet is very good as we need a few label tweaks here and there, but this gives a roadmap of where we are. People can play with it, and then they'll know. you know, they'll know. I mean, that's not the, I think that the whole question is that it needs to be explained in a way that people can understand it. And then when they understand it, they'll be more likely to vote for it than if they don't understand it. So, you know, I think that making it so that the lowest common denominator can try to understand it is the.
Well,
And that's
you're absolutely
me.
right.
That's me.
Hey, no, not at all. But I think the spreadsheet is for the wonks. I think to your point earlier in a couple of comments you made, Paula, and I think Chair Reynolds said too. There's different ways of communicating too, and it's not just the spreadsheet. It's got to be something that's some a lot of people don't understand that, and it's not no skin off their nose. It's just
And I think
experience,
that,
right?
and we know by what the last levy did, that people didn't understand. So that
Yeah.
the problem's not changing, it's just the messaging needed to change.
And
Respond.
I will just say that after walking through the challenging time of the pandemic, coming out of that, literally hitting a race on the entire budget, saying every department, you have to build it back from the ground up, from not 1 cent. You don't get to carry anything forward. We have scrubbed. Your team that works for you right now has scrubbed, and we don't have anything left to give on the expenditure side, because if there was anything there, it was taken. It was removed, it was tightened. Those belts were way too tight, which is part of what we saw in the mid buy. It was a little too tight. And that's it's we've already done half of the equation, and hard, and it has not been pretty. And now that's why we're to the point of having this discussion of it now has to go to the other side. It has to go to the revenue side. So I just want for everybody's just that we're, part of this conversation is that we have done the work here
Right.
internally.
Another point is when you're, right now, there's a lot of things that are everything is raising their hand for more money, everything. And, and a really good example of, trying to do something for the right reasons, but it literally really failed, was the city of Seattle. They put in a business tax on these high, like the Amazons, and, they all left. They're all left. So now downtown, okay, they put in this tax, and if people were there, they'd make that money. But now they don't even have anybody to rent the offices, because all of the big company says, I'm not going to pay that, I'm gone. So, I mean, it's like when you're asking for money, you got to be careful too, and doing it strategically.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I said I wasn't gonna speak again, but. Actually, it's really funny, because this has been a bit of an aha moment for me. When we went through the process with the levy this previous cycle, and again, again, camaraderie. Folks, we're not, we're not spinning anything, this is an open conversation, trying to get to what we need to do. I didn't think about this actually, Georgia Vaughn, but when people said to us, you need to go to do this exercise, you need to do this. Administrator Hill said, we went during the COVID crisis, we went to zero basis budgeting. King County right now, for the first time, is going to zero. First time in recent memory with the new executive. He's doing a fantastic job. He's going to zero base. He's saying, you got to justify it. You got to go. And that's what Administrator Hill did during the COVID crisis. And I think that maybe because the administration went through that, and the leadership team went through that previously, there's a little bit of we already did that, but we didn't, not we, I mean, I was not part of the leadership team at that point, but they went through that. And so it's easy to forget that was something that was an exercise that was already done. And I appreciate you bringing that up again, because it is still instructive right now to let the community know it was starting from foundational levels, every department had to justify their budget, soup to nuts from bottom up. And other cities didn't do that. And the other cities are the ones that are right now having challenges.
And just to your point really quick before
Yeah.
Larry Goldman is that, you know, when you do that though, you have to tell the people that that's what you've done. Because so many people
Yeah.
were talking about that, well, they should do this. It's like, well, you know,
Exactly.
you already did it, but
Yeah.
nobody knew it.
Well,
So,
We did it to survive.
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was-
In the pandemic,
just-
it's hard to get
Sure,
information
sure.
out.
And,
Yes.
and again, for the conversation, it
Let's
is
not forget.
important to recognize. Yeah.
Councilmember Goldman, you've been patient. Yes.
Sorry.
Oh.
He's working on it.
Your audio just cut out at the end, but you're kind of looking at the screen, so I wonder if you called on me.
Yes.
Oh.
Oh, I think you're having.
Your audio is very poor at the moment. Would now be appropriate to kind of say some bucket numbers that I'm thinking of?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so my thoughts are, as a policy, I'd like to do 500,000 in the strategic opportunity fund. Based on how much the Lakefront Park costs, that seems like a reasonable amount. And I'd like to go big on the budget stabilization fund to more accurately tell the story. So I was thinking 6 million in the budget stabilization fund, and that basically tells the narrative to the community. This will pay for $1 million per year of structural deficit. And what we have remaining in the general fund, that is what is more accurately described as unallocated, because that structural deficit is not unallocated. It is allocated for future biennia. So that's kind of where I was seeing the buckets go. And then using that to kind of say, well, here's the magnitude of the levy we would need.
Thank you for that rundown. I think we can look at that at the next meeting and see how that pairs with a more smaller number and what our implications are. So appreciate you bringing your numbers to the table. We are at time, so do you want to respect staff's time and council members' time? I think this is a good place for us to step away. We're gonna look at the spreadsheet again, double check our nomenclature, make sure it's more understandable and maybe kind of tune it a little bit.
so our next steps and what did we agree that we're going to do based on this conversation to the spreadsheet?
I'll look at the nomenclature. I was gonna look at additional line kind of down in the fund balance area. Like some big things for that, and then we can put in some of Goldman's numbers. You can take them home and play with them, not with us, so.
Yeah.
You have to
Plug away.
Yeah, and I mean, open to critiques on what can make this more readable, more usable. We'll see what can be incorporated in what amount. Councilmember Rosenau.
One thing that would be helpful for me thinking about the Strategic Opportunity Fund, obviously that's a place where it is unanticipated opportunities, and so it's a little bit hard to put a number to it. But Mayor French did mention a few possible things that may be glimmering on the horizon. Obviously, and in my mind, certainly the recent sale and possible resale or redevelopment of town center also seems to represent a place where being able to put cash on the barrel may help move it in a direction that we would want it to. I do not, in my head, know what those numbers would look like to do any of that. And so if there is some way to put numbers on some of those intuitions from anyone, or if that's just a conversation that we would have and try to if it is just sort of gut, then that's fine too. But if there is some way to anchor that number other than to say it was at $500,000 before and that worked, because we do have this windfall, and I would feel bad just sort of trickling it out to pay down deficits. It is an opportunity to do something nice, and I would hate to lose out on that if there is something like that on the horizon.
And
I I appreciate that.
No, just when you're tweaking the spreadsheet, can you use, we're talking about doing a cover sheet to do some definitions.
Yeah.
And maybe the restrictions of what those funds hold.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
and then even something about the auditing. I think for people to understand that changing the numbers in a certain way could really drive you into an audit spin, that needs to be explained somehow or defined.
I would define it as an unintended consequence down the road.
But
Yeah,
still,
well,
Yeah.
but that's in auditing, unintended consequence for, yeah, that might be the simplest way. But I
Yeah.
completely understand the request.
Perfect. So I think we've got a couple of takeaways that we gotta make some improvements. So this is a bit more intuitive and readable and to the general public and to us. Continue to bring your ideas.
are we gonna put
council
this,
members?
are we going to, when will this become outwardly facing for the public to play with? Will there be anything going out? Maybe some sort of blast, some that where we are, because I know we have people that follow these meetings, but then there's some that don't. So maybe putting it out there somehow, Matt.
I think at some point in the future, I think without definitions, a cover sheet, how.
Right. Not now, but
Yeah, once we package it into a user-friendly
It's close.
way, it's close.
Yeah, you bet.
I mean, it's already been provided to council as part of the public record.
It's out there.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to play with it, but
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 yeah,
that
I
needs to be
think it
some
needs some
guardrails.
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
I'm all for that. Guardrails.
Yeah, no, I think that the
Public safety,
intent is
right.
that we'll get it a little bit more user-friendly for those folks that aren't, spreadsheet wonks like I am. And we'll get that out there when it's something that they can really use and understand. It just doesn't make sense to get it out there if they can't understand it, right? Right. But yeah, as the mayor said, it's in the public read world, and
It's out there.
if you really want it,
You bet.
just grab it.
Take a look.
Let us know. Perfect. I think that's all I have. We did not have no new business. And seeing that respecting time, I think we'll be done with this conversation and we are adjourned. Ta-da.